folks, and welcome back to the plot. It's a gorgeous day at the start of June for me. I'm filming this a little bit earlier than it goes out, and today we're going to do a nice relaxed garden tour. I love doing these garden tours because for me they're a bit of a journal. They're fantastic to look back. I always recommend that other people do similar. I'm not one for keeping a paper journal. I love the idea of it, but I know I'll never do it. So these video tours are fantastic, and I recommend you do it as well. Just get your phone out, walk around first person. You don't have to talk to the camera or anything, but it's so good being able to look back across your successes and failures, look at where you are compared to, year on year, where you were at last May, last March, see what you're behind on, see what's doing really well. I love these as well because it means I'm up here for a good amount of time without having to worry too much about the to-do list, and just I can enjoy being here. Last tour, it was empty beds galore, and this time it's looking a little bit better, but there are still empty beds. So this one up here at the start of the plot is completely empty. One thing that has taken a lot of time this month is a bit of emptying of the compost bays, and it's probably the wrong time of year to do this. Ideally you want to do this kind of at the end of winter, really getting ready for prep, kind of February, March. Fantastic job, because then you've got all your compost, you know how much you need to order or buy in, and you can start spreading it on your beds and that kind of thing. I have been able to take out a decent amount of compost, but it has been an absolute faff and an awful lot of work at the wrong time of year when I would rather be doing other things, planting things out, sowing, all that kind of stuff. So this one bed, it's a little bit slower as well because of the shade of this tree. You see we're in the shade of a massive, massive bay tree. So this is a very shady bed. It warms up a little bit slower, and I do tend to plant into this much later in the season. As always, the working area is working, the shed is still on the verge of collapsing, but we don't look at that too closely. Fantastic news for the brassicas. I planted these out just yesterday and they've survived the first day. Thank goodness they haven't been eaten by slugs just yet. I'm sure they will get a lot of slug pressure incoming. But right at the foreground, you might notice these spring onions. They have had some serious slug pressure, and I don't know what's happened this year. There are two things I have been unable to grow: spring onions, and just next door in this shade there is a few little beetroot which I planted out, which to my surprise are still alive somehow. I planted those out quite a few weeks ago because they were doing just absolutely nothing in the greenhouses. But as we work down the plot, it does get a little bit prettier. The broad beans, these have just started going a little bit wild. These are a dwarf broad bean, so normal broad beans will get much, much higher than this, but the Sutton dwarf I quite like because it's just less work. They don't require as much support, and normally they can take their own weight, but it is really, really windy. This last week has been quite stormy, and you'll see throughout bits of today it gets quite gusty as well. The black fly have just started to arrive on these. In fact, I caught them a little bit late, so they are starting to grow a little bit funky from the aphid pressure, this black fly, and I have been coming in here and just squishing these. Basically is probably the best way to deal with them. It is a real shame because if you get too much pressure, they actually destroy the broad bean pods. Hopefully you can see that one there has just turned completely black and it won't grow quite right. So I do need to continue to be on those, but we do have some spring onions in here, and these lettuce really, really pressured. I think I'm not actually sure if this is slugs or pigeons. It could be pigeons, but amazing red lettuce. This is red salad bowl, and it just doesn't really get eaten by the wildlife, and it tastes fantastic as well. It's not very bitter. It's a really nice mild red lettuce that I really, really recommend. It does grow quite well for me. It's a little bit late now, but lettuce is the one thing I have bundles and bundles of. We've got loads of it growing, and I've taken loads home to harvest. This is kind of the lettuce patch now, and there's a few more that I've planted out. These green ones are saladin. And once again, I'm not sure if this is pigeon pressure or slugs, but they're not looking too happy. We've got a little bit of chicory coming up there. That's a new one for me, and I planted some chicory out yesterday, so it's looking all floppy. This in here is a bit weird, isn't it? This is just a little strip of weeds, and I've done this basically because the main weed that's coming up is actually verbena, and I really like this verbena, so I do want to keep a few of these plants on, but I also wanted to leave it as a demonstration of what these beds look like if I don't hoe, just as a bit of a comparison really. If I don't hoe and keep on top of these, then they do get super, super weedy. I get quite a few comments, sort of people saying, where are all your weeds, JB? And it's just that I'm on top of the hoeing. I either hoe quite regularly or I mulch. And this year, as you go, weed control becomes a little bit easier each year if you're on top of things. If you let things go completely fallow, like my neighbour here, then you know, it's sort of like starting from scratch, because that seed bank in the soil will really build up. But if you're on top of it every year, those seeds are coming back. They're younger, it's not perennial stuff that's really strong and got roots below the ground. And I'm finding this year is probably the least effort I've had to put into weeding. You know, just a little hoeing off here and there. It's very quick, very easy. And normally at the start of spring, I like to mulch with horse manure, but I simply ran out this year and I'm not getting another delivery for another month or so. So this year I've sort of gone back to basics and just hoeing off the weeds, and it's working okay. There's a little gap there for something. I'm sure I'll find something, but the next bed over. We do have a few flowers in here. I planted out loads of cheap flowers that I bought from a garden centre. I didn't grow these from seed. And these are flowering. A lot of the flowers did get immediately eaten. I think this is a dahlia or a dahlia over here. Not very happy. But in this one, this is quite interesting. We've got some volunteer lettuce. Now this isn't something I see too often, and I think it's because people probably hoe this off when it's this sort of size. This isn't lettuce, but if you seed small lettuce seeds, you probably won't recognise them and just think they're a weed. But these come back every year. I actually let the lettuce around here go to seed and they come back. This, I believe, is all year round lettuce, which is a butterhead, and that is perfect for harvesting today. But I'm going to leave that. My parents will be along watering soon for me. They do come and water the allotment sometimes when we're away, so I'll leave that for them and say that they can take it. We've got down here just a little bit of calendula as well, another one that I leave to kind of self-sow, and then when I do my hoeing, I let things get a little bit bigger, and then I can sort of spot what's a weed and what's something I want to keep as a volunteer. Just yesterday, I planted out all of my beans, and we've got a mixture of beans, and they look okay. They look like they've not been eaten too much overnight. This one is Kalima. This is a dwarf French bean, or a bush bean. Once again, I love these bush varieties because you don't need to faff around with trailing and netting and supporting and all that kind of thing. So Kalima is just my favourite as well. It is so sweet. I grew it for the first time last year and it blew me away. I'd never grown bush beans, and you have to try them if you can get them. They're a little bit hard to get in the UK, but I've done a sort of double line there, and then another double line here. So it's sort of like a line there, then a gap so I can get in, a line there, a line there. And a lot of these will have had 2 seeds in each cell that's gone out, so you can plant these really, really densely, and you've just got to be on the harvesting. Make sure you get them while it's young. And these ones are a new one for me this year. They look almost exactly the same, but this is a dwarf borlotto. I assume the same as a borlotti, but I've never seen them before, and I saw them and I couldn't resist. The seed packet went straight in my trolley, because borlotti are just gorgeous, but one that I can't be bothered faffing around with. We've got a few more flowers in the corner here. This Nemesia flowered and then immediately got eaten by slugs. So they're not doing too well, but it's nice to have a little bit, and hopefully they will come to something at some point. The next big bed on this kind of first plot, we've got some peas that are just about hanging in there. The structure, the support structure for these guys is a little bit ragtag. I just put 3 pins in the ground and then have kind of strung along them. It needs another line of string actually, but we've got some nice flowers and hopefully these will start cropping soon. This is a dwarfing variety. Once again, there's a pattern here, isn't there? I do like the dwarfing varieties. But even these you have to support, you have to kind of faff around with a little bit. There's no getting around it. And in here, I've got 2 lines of Kelvedon Wonder up against this little bed frame that I found that I've just tied to some pins that I also found in a skip. And hopefully, I did see that the mice had come along and had a little dig in here, but hopefully these will germinate soon enough. And over here, this is like a permanent fixture on the allotment now. The monster chard. I detest Swiss chard as a vegetable. I do not like the taste of it one bit. I've tried it many ways. It is not for me. But every year, this big yellow Swiss chard plant comes back, and I never really have the heart to take it down. It's just incredible. When these things start to grow, they are remarkable. It will get to kind of 9 foot tall, way, way, way taller to go yet. And they have this super funky stem, and these seeds, it even smells quite nice, and I think it's good for the pollinators. So I always leave this just as a little bit of interest. Whenever the neighbours come by, they're always looking at it like, what is that? You know, normally you're used to chard being this tiny little plant that you pick and eat, but I really love that little feature. The hot bin is working nicely this year. Now that I've started getting grass clippings, it is rocketing away in there. It's cooled down a little bit. It does kind of go in cycles. I'm not able to maintain it at full heat at all times, but if we have a look at the temperature probe, it's still nice and warm, around kind of 35. And I've just brought up our kitchen food scraps and some shredded cardboard as well that will go in there, make it super nice. This bed is looking fantastic now. Just yesterday I planted a load of courgettes and beans in here at the back. I did faff around as well with this support. This scaffolding has been on the plot since I arrived, but just yesterday I put up some bean netting, which I'm hoping will do these beans really well. These are called yin yang, and there's a few Christmas lima beans in there as well. The yin yang look absolutely amazing. I saw a comment saying that someone calls them cow beans because they're black and white like a cow. They look really, really cool. But I was so worried about these courgettes. There's a series in here, kind of all green bush, butter stick, and another one, Bianca di Trieste, I think. And I've gone way too thick in here because I'm anticipating that the slugs will get more than a few of these, but they're looking quite nice and healthy. They've got a good few leaves on them, so I'm hoping at least they'd be able to take a bit of slug damage. Really happy with this bed. I sort of made a no-dig bed here with horse manure over the top maybe about a month or two ago. I can't remember exactly, but it's holding up quite nice. It was a really weedy, kind of rough looking one, and I thought this would be a good way to go, kind of giving it a good cardboard mulch. There was a lot of weeds in here, a lot of weed pressure. So for something like this, I do quite like a no-dig approach. The grass definitely is in need of a cut. I do like to maybe have a little trim before doing a tour normally. But this is going to be a little area for my tomatoes, my outdoor tomatoes. I'm going to get a little trellis going on over here. Let's have a quick look in the greenhouse. This is looking almost empty now after all the work yesterday. Spring onions, my absolute nemesis. I've tried many different packets of seeds. They're just not growing for me this year. I think I've been unlucky with my seeds. I've still got some sweet potato slips, and I was kind of planning on putting these under my tomatoes in the polytunnel, which we'll see. We'll see that later. And I've put so many tomatoes in there. I'm not sure that that is the best idea. So I might need to come up with a plan B for the sweet potatoes. I've got one down here on the ground in a massive 30-litre pot. Although I say massive, I don't think it's that big for a sweet potato. They can get very big, but this thing is growing really nicely since I potted it up. Got a little tray here with some interesting stuff. A ground cherry, which has just started growing. This thing has sat here for about a month and a half, just with like its first leaves doing nothing. I've got some really, really slow aubergines as well. These just haven't wanted to get going, but they are finally moving. I don't have much hope for these, to be honest, but I'm gonna stick with them, see what they do. You never know. One more tray of spare tomatoes. I think these will either be going in the ground over on this side of the greenhouse. It's still a little bit used for storage at the moment, but under here, there is soil. It is good ground. I've got kind of half of the greenhouse for growing in the ground, and the other half is paved for shelving and storage and that kind of thing. And these ones are a bit of a temporary store. A few chili peppers in here, looking really good actually. Some of these chili peppers are really, really healthy, looking fantastic. These ones in their medium-sized pots looking good. A few more tomatoes back here. Once again, slightly surplus to requirement. I'll probably be giving those ones away. Some more chilies down in the corner. I will probably end up putting a 30-litre bucket down there. It's a really good little spot for something, a big old bucket. And we've got some basil growing, it's moving, yes! Another one that was so slow, but I've potted these on. They're in quite big pots now, slightly too big, if anything, but looking really healthy. I think they need a slight water. Got a little dill in here as well. I did sow a whole tray of different herbs, and these are basically the only survivors. They didn't really want to grow, so I'm very happy to have these basil. These will probably go in the ground somewhere around the tomatoes. Between greenhouse 1 and 2, we have this other little working area where I've got a bathtub set out for when I want to do really big potting projects. This is a little bit funky. You don't see this too many times on YouTube, I don't think. You do see people using bathtubs on allotments, but often for beds or carrots or that kind of thing. But I just use this for making massive loads of potting mix because I grow a lot of stuff in pots. And this is probably the best way of making up, 200 litres of potting mix in short order. Greenhouse number 2 is it's a mixture of a potting greenhouse and a chili greenhouse. So the chilies in here, once again, looking pretty good. They've done a little bit of stalling. I think they were brought out about a month ago now, and a lot of potting up a week or so after that. A lot of different size pots you'll see, and I've done a whole video all about pot size that I'll link in the description if you want to look at that for chilies. A lot of them are in smaller pots, very deliberately, because I just want a smaller plant this year. These are the Scallywag, looking really good. This is a KS Sweet Queenie, which I have accidentally let get very droughty, but no doubt it will bounce back. I've given it a good water. And the seed trays are looking pretty much empty, which might be cause for concern for some people, but for me, this is fantastic news because it means I've just planted everything out. We are waiting a little while for these squash to come out, but I need to have a little bit of a think about what I want to sow next. But I'm just really pleased every time this sort of bit of the season where I start to get everything planted out, because it's a mixed blessing in here. You know, sometimes you come in and this is full of seedlings and you think, oh, that looks amazing. But at the same time you think, oh, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of things to plant out and get moving. Now the chili peppers in the greenhouse on the floor are looking really good. We've got a mixture in here. We've got some in the quad grow at the back and some in pots at the front. And the ones in pots, I must say, seem to be responding much better than the ones in the quad grow. The ones in the quad grow haven't done much growing since they went in, but I'm sure a little bit of patience, a little bit of time, they're probably just focusing on that root growth, all important root growth, and then they'll start to grow up top in time. This is phenomenal though. Look at this. This is my gochu, my Korean pepper. This is just one of my favorites. This thing just wants to grow and it looks beautiful doing it. Absolutely lovely. It gets these quite big, mildish pods, lovely red colour, and just, whoa, this is the best looking chili plant I've got this year. Hands down, absolutely love it. I really am incredibly pleased with the chili peppers this year. Hands down, my best year to date. I started them the earliest, they got flying, and this year I've been filming a whole chili pepper growing guide. If you want to take a look at that, links in the description below. From the second greenhouse, we're going to go over to what I call the second plot, because what we've just been looking at is what I first took on 4 years ago. But just last year, I took on this extension to the plot. So over here, we've got a little orchard. This is part of the one that I've been on for kind of 4 years. We've got this lovely cherry and the apples are coming. This is a lovely discovery type, really nice, sweet, early red apples. And just next door, we've got this tree, which I planted myself a little while back, Lord Lambourne, and for the first time, it's looking like we might get some fruit off this, which is very exciting. Underneath the orchard, I'm trying to create a little meadow, and I've been kind of trying to establish some wildflowers in here, and most exciting down here, next to this big pot full of leek trimmings, we have just here a yellow rattle flower. This is looking really healthy. Oh, there's a cute little beetle in there. And what I'll do is I'll take the seeds of this when they're all dried, and I'll just scatter them in this grass, and hopefully it will parasitize the grass or kind of feed off the grass roots, reduce the vigor of the grass, and let lots of wildflowers in. That's a short version, basically. Plot 1 looking relatively tidy. Plot 2 over here, a bit more of a mess. You know, there's all sorts of stuff down here, rubbish. We'll look in the polytunnel last. But, oh, I'm so pleased. Over here, I have built a little sweet pea frame, kind of in honour of Greenside Up, my good friend, Steve. And I've planted down here some of his favourite sweet peas. This is his Chelsea collection favourites over here on the left. And they were looking a little bit squiffy when they first went out, to be honest, but they're really starting to heart up, starting to beef up. And yes, they could be much bigger. We've got some in the back garden at home, which are halfway up this kind of trellis by now, but they will pick up. And I really love this. We made this quite recently, this little flower bed with some old sleepers. It's like a recycled greenhouse base. And I've got some cosmos in here, some dahlias that have been eaten by slugs, some zinnias that have been eaten by slugs, some alyssum which haven't been eaten by slugs, and some lobelias as well, which I'm hoping will start to trail over the edge. But really pleased with how this is looking, and the fact that I've actually managed to commit to something in flowers and carried it out. We've still got a while until those flowers will actually look really nice, but they're getting there, they're moving in the right direction. And flowers is one of those things that every year I say, oh, I'd like to do a few more flowers this year, and then I never do. And then this year I've finally committed, I've grown much more flowers, and I'm hoping a month from now the plot will look like it's kind of in bloom with a lot more flowers. Behind me here, I've got this big Bertha of a bed, an absolutely massive bed. I've tried to go with more kind of proper raised beds on this allotment because the soil depth is quite low. Next to the polytunnel, we've got all sorts of pots with some garlic, some freshly planted potatoes, and some good looking potatoes over there. But this bed is it's a bit weird. I'm still learning, trying to figure out exactly what to do with it. There's a load of cardboard on there at the moment and a load of spare potatoes that someone gave me the other day that I'm yet to plant, but I did put in a few flowers in the corner here. We've got a flowering nasturtium, some cosmos, and some little apricotta cosmos as well, sulphur cosmos, which is growing quite slowly. But there's a few lettuce in here that are just hanging on. Some of them are looking okay. Some of them have been bitten really hard by the wildlife. There's a little lily coming up over there as well, a volunteer. This one is sorrel that just volunteered. I've taken a few leaves from there, some early harvest, but it's going to seed now. You'll see that all over the place. There's a little brassica flower in there as well, currently being visited by a bee, which is lovely. This garlic, not very good. This is just some little supermarket garlic that I stuck in a pot in the middle of winter just to see if it would do anything. I did sow some carrots in here too, and you can just about see there's 1 or 2 carrots in here, a volunteer tomato by the looks of it. Lots of weeds. Lots of weeds in this one. What's this? Get out of here. Chickweed. But there are 1 or 2 carrots. Look at that. That's a carrot. Oh dear me. Just a little experiment, see what comes up. Not worth crying about if it fails. These ones I've just planted up with some new spuds and they're not coming up just yet, but we'll see. These are looking fantastic. I absolutely love the sight of these. I'm pretty much keeping on top of the watering, which is something I'm quite bad at with potatoes in pots, but looking really good. We've also got some volunteer potatoes that are looking quite healthy in this big Bertha bed. And when you've got too much space and you're not 100% sure what to do with it, plant a pumpkin. I've just planted that little pumpkin yesterday, hanging in. Once again, no slug damage. Thank goodness me, somehow. A few more flowers in the corner. What I do like to do as an idea, it doesn't always come to fruition, but quite often with the flowers, I've just been putting them in little corners of veg beds. And when they do, if they do come to fruition, they look really good. Rhubarb has been stonking this year, absolutely sublime. So huge, huge leaves on here. And I think it probably needs dividing. You can probably turn that into about 3 now, but just love it. Love rhubarb in spring. This asparagus bed, it looks a little bit ramshackle because there's a few bits of wood and some netting. This is just to keep the foxes off, and it could look much prettier. I know, I apologize, but it has done its job. This freshly made raised bed hasn't been dug in. This has had an awful lot of energy put into it in terms of like nice, lovely compost and well-rotted horse manure. And all of these 10 asparagus crowns have taken. I have been looking for asparagus beetle. And if we just bear with me while I go manual focus, is that asparagus beetle? Little black beetles. Oh, I think that might be it. So I just got my phone out and had a little Google about asparagus beetle, and 2 things. 1, that's not what asparagus beetles look like. They're not black like that. And 2, that wasn't a beetle. I don't know what it was, but apparently I need glasses. It was like a little bit of, I don't know, just rubbish. It was just kind of stuck to the asparagus. So that's good. No asparagus beetle yet. Touch wood. Touch wood. They have all kind of fallen over and gone a bit, you know, rank and wild, but I think that's quite normal, isn't it? First year of planting. These, they don't look like much, but this is basically the same as leaves on a more, you know, quote unquote normal plant. So this is doing all the photosynthesizing, taking that energy, and at the end of the season it will put it back down into the crown and grow back much stronger next year and the year after. Back here we've got a little funky section of the allotment with some plum trees at the back. Now down here, when I took the plot on, I did a no-dig area. This whole area, we've got a bit of wood chip under this sour cherry tree. Must admit, this isn't my favourite. It might come out at some point. Very sour, and yes, a lot of faff defending this from birds and that kind of thing. But the beds have been okay. There is quite a lot of weed pressure starting to come through now, but this hasn't had any more manure since it had its first proper whack of manure when it was created back last April, you know, over a year ago. So looking pretty weed free in, you know, all things considered. And back here we've just got some flower beds basically. There's all sorts in here, cosmos, nemesia. All this one's just trying to flower. That's quite cute. We've got a little bit of lobelia in here. You're seeing the same flowers kind of repeated, as I got quite a few from the garden centre that were the same. This is a little phacelia, which actually, I don't like. Planted this last year as a green cover crop and all of it died apart from this one plant, and it turns out I think it's quite ugly. So I don't think I'd be doing that one again. There's a lot of kind of blank canvas back here, you know, this one hasn't been done, that one hasn't been done. This one I've just put a sweet pea in, I'll show you that in a second. And this one I have finally sown something in, and this has got parsnips in. So parsnip seed, it takes a long time to germinate. And the way that I do parsnips, you can see my dib holes in there. So I've just gone through, dibbed just little depressions in the soil where I've sprinkled a little bit of parsnip seed. There's a spare one there. And it can take a good few weeks to germinate. I find if you leave it a bit later in the season, you can sow this in March, but I find a little bit later in May, it's much quicker to germinate. And in a bed where you might have weeds coming up, then that speedy germination is actually really important, because otherwise you're going to have parsnips that are just under a sea of weeds, and A, you won't be able to see them, and B, they're going to get outcompeted by the weeds. We've got another few little flowers in here. These sweet peas were just some spares from home that I've chucked in the ground. I doubt they're going to come to much. They really were languishing for ages, and I kept meaning to bring them up and I didn't. There's a little bit of mint in here too, which is quite nice. But these are kind of overflow beds, really. When I get a little something that needs to go in here, it will come out. Just next door to those, we've got 3 really nice raised beds, and look at these, look at this. This is my victorious peas. They're just like incredible. Look at the size of them. I'm lost for words. Absolutely amazing. Like I said earlier, I really like dwarfing varieties. I don't tend to do climbing stuff, but this year I put the effort in. I made a little scaffolding frame, got some pea and bean netting, and oh, it's worked a treat. I've had to do a couple of little strings here and there to just bring it in, and it's working fantastically. What I was hoping is that they would be flowering on this side and kind of drooping through the netting. Hasn't quite worked, because I thought that might be really easy to harvest when you've got all the peas kind of drooping down, but it should still be nice and easy to harvest. And I've got a little bit of bed space in here for something else. One thing I do have on this allotment is foxes that love to dig. So you'll see a lot of fox protection. This bed, pretty shocking. Actually, this is probably the worst bed on the allotment at the moment. This was a lovely no dig bed. I did like a fresh bit of manure. And then the foxes came in, dug it all up, and it kind of knocked my momentum a little bit, to be honest. And I just went, you know what? Screw it. Okay, fine. I'll just leave it. It won't be no dig. And where it got all the soil mixed in, that's where all the weed seed has germinated. So I'll do something with this, you know, when I've got something that needs to plant out. And this one, as you can see, this is Fox Defense City. And in here, we've got some onions and some carrots. And let's take a closer look. The good news, we've got fantastic lines of carrots in here. They took a little while to germinate, and I was skeptical that they would germinate at all, but they're here now. But the bad news is the onions. I think these are dead, basically. These have gone out around this size, and they've looked this size the entire time. You know, these should be a month or 2, 8 weeks away from harvest, and they're doing absolutely nothing. So not sure what happened there. They were sown on Boxing Day from seed, and they looked really, really healthy until they went out into this bed, where they just really stalled and did nothing. But I quite often, my onions aren't great on the allotment. I get onion white rot. So, you know, any onion is a bonus, and this year it's looking like I'm gonna get none. But hey ho, they're cheap. At least it's not a really expensive crop. But look at the peas in the background. That's all that matters, isn't it? Look at those peas. You know, you win some, you lose some on the allotment. You have to have that attitude, otherwise it'd be a pretty miserable experience growing your own, I think. And last but certainly not least, that brings us round to the Polytunnel, which is still a bit of a building site. There's still stuff absolutely everywhere, but look at this, look at this. We've got fresh manure, not a weed in sight. Look at it, this raised bed. Absolutely fantastic, just planted out. Chili peppers down here, we've got a goshu at the back, purple, that's a Zimbabwe black, and a little ring of fire at the front here. My first ripe chili pepper on this one as well. That's ready to harvest. Generally, you should be taking your chilies off at this super early stage if you want a nice big plant, but I'm not too bothered about these. I just wanted to see what a chili pepper would do in the ground, to be honest. We've got this support system that I just rigged up. I've done that in a video. A few bits of timber, basically just screwed into the frame, and various bits kind of jury rigged, and all of these strings dangling down, ready for stuff to be looped around. A little line of cucumbers. Oh, I love this. I love this. And actually, these tomatoes looking really good. I thought they'd all be kind of sulking and having a bit of transplant shock because they just came out yesterday, but they're looking really good. Really, really happy with this. All sorts over here, sort of leftovers, bits to plant on, bits to go in the other greenhouse, tomatoes and aubergines and melons and all that stuff. And then over here, another big job that I've just finished, and that is getting my autopot system plumbed in. This is set up, ready now. I was wondering about whether or not I should get these potted on really quick, because this is actually 4 plants in one pot with really cool dividers. So there's 3 pots here, but there's 12 plants that need to be split out and put into their individual pots. We've got a few more set out ready for the automatic watering. We've got the chili grow. I must say the plants in here, similar to the quad grow, really, really stalling, not doing too much at all. The thing you want to look for with your chili peppers, if they're looking a little bit slow, they're not growing much, look at the stem and look at the top of the plant for new growth. I say this all the time when I'm looking at my chili peppers. This stem is pretty bereft. There's not much going on there, and it's quite a lot of fruit, not a great sign. But what you really want is something like over here. We've got 3 peppers in their kind of final pot size now. These are just going to stay here for the rest of the season. And there's one at the back there, a Hainan yellow lantern, and this has looked very slow. It's looked a bit poorly. A lot of leaves kind of went yellow when I brought it outside, and it just wasn't happy. But if you look at the stem, lots of healthy new growth. So absolutely just perfect, what you want to see. That means you've got a healthy plant, the roots are growing away, and the leaves will follow. And with the leaves comes eventually the fruit. So really, really pleased with this side of the greenhouse. We've got a lot of space here. Basically going to have a series of chili pepper pots here, another series of chili pepper pots there. We've got this little trough of strawberries smelling fantastic at the moment. Anything in here ready to eat? Oh, that one's nearly there. Bit of a strange variety. I'm not sure which these ones are. They do have a bit of a funky thing going on. Very, very soft. What I really want is these in hanging baskets in the tunnel eventually, so they don't rot as they're in contact with the soil and they just kind of dangle over nice and easy. It's been a very, very tricky start to the year. So much grey cloud, grey weather, stuff just refusing to grow. And even now, we're still getting a lot of grey days, really windy, a bit horrible, not ideal or perfect for your plants. But all things considered, I'm pretty happy with where I'm at this season, mainly because I've just got the tomatoes and the chilies all potted up and planted out. There's not loads of stuff in my greenhouse ready to go. I think mostly now for more kind of beans and peas, I want to do direct sowing. Hopefully those successions will take off and I'll sow those in a few weeks. I do need to have a little bit of a think about what to start sowing in the greenhouse, but I'm about to go away on holiday, so that can wait. Thank you ever so much for joining me. Hopefully you really enjoyed this tour around my allotment garden, and hopefully I'll see you again next time. An extra special thank you to all of my Chili Pepper tier patrons: Tony, Bill, Pam, Louise, Mel, Michael, Denise, Socks in the Garden, Andrew, Sarah, Dorcas, Louise, Angela, Andre and Brett. You make my life so much easier. Thank you ever so much for watching.